Hello? Look! Hey! Listen! Watch out!
Hello, this is Link on Air, and today we'll be reviewing The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. And just to clarify, this will be a review of the original Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time on the N64, so the score at the end will not reflect the quality of the 3DS version or Master Quest, which will be touched on at a later date when I'm able to record them. Alright, let's get started. Do I even need to tell anyone what the story is for this game at this point? Chances are you've already played this game or some other entry in the series, so I guess I'll just make this review spoiler-tastic. You are Link, wielder of the Triforce of Courage and the Master Sword, who must defeat the King of Evil Ganon, or Ganondorf, and chances are you'll probably save Princess Zelda at some point. With that out of the way, I'll use the leftover time to talk about the unique elements of this game's story, good or bad. Let's get the good out of the way first. I absolutely love how the game wastes no time throwing you into the dungeon, boss fight, and into the Kingdom of Hyrule. Hell, you could probably make it to the second dungeon within the first hour of playtime if you know what you're doing. I wish more 3D Zelda entries were like that. Primarily Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword, though that's about it for the good of the story. The plot twist near the end that Sheik was actually Zelda caught me off guard the first time I played the game, so I'd say that was successful, though that does lead into one of my gripes with the story. First off, Sheik is a ninja, often shown vanishing from plain sight in a flash, flames of a volcano, or even the cover of a sandstorm. She can apparently scale trees and architecture and maneuver the harsh environments of the Gerudo Desert with relative ease, so why on earth does she do nothing but teach Link songs? I mean, seriously, she's a freaking ninja! She can't assist Link in combat? At all? All she does is give you the Ocarina lessons and get beaten up by a ghost and captured by Ganon. Tetra may have followed the same twist that they went for with Sheik, but at least she was competent, rescuing prisoners from Ganon's fortress and even attempting to create a diversion for Link and her to escape. Perhaps it was just due to the limitations of the N64, but I really don't buy that. They could have done something in cutscenes. Second, what purpose did it serve to have Kakariko Village set on fire when Bongo Bongo escaped? I get that he's an evil spirit, but from what I understand, he didn't bust out of the well until after the village had caught fire. I don't really have too many solutions to those problems, but given its age and what it was trying to do, I guess I can't be too hard on it. I'd complain about the use of time travel as well, but that'd be just beating up a dead horse, and it'd just open up Pandora's box of other problems I have with the use of time travel in the series. Now, the gameplay on the other hand is rather interesting, what with this being Zelda's first transition into 3D. I imagine that Nintendo had a lot on their shoulders with this game. It obviously wasn't going to be like Mario, which was focused primarily on jumping and platforming challenges, which I assume would be easier to translate into 3D. Since Zelda was all about exploration and using a wide range of items to traverse an overworld and dungeons, I think what they came up with for the controls works remarkably well. So well, in fact, that they've literally used it in every other 3D Zelda game since, which are all nearly identical mechanically speaking. The controls don't even need dwelling on, seeing how the game tells you what almost every button is mapped to do, apart from the Z targeting. And because of this, the game is incredibly easy to pick up and play. Unless you're a certain friend of mine, who somehow nearly got killed by a stationary Deku Baba. You know who you are. I think by far the best addition to this game was the Z targeting system, which works perfectly with the new 3D perspective. Since the focus of the series in 3D is largely on dungeon and puzzle solving, the system allows the combat to become a puzzle in and of itself, rather than a hack and slash, as that would undermine the puzzle solving somewhat. I don't really have a lot of problems with the way the game controls overall. I am curious as to why the action button says attack when you're running, but only performs a roll. It's not bad, it's just weird. On the other hand, dungeons and boss designs do have some problems. My biggest issue with the dungeons is that most of the puzzles aren't really puzzles. Most of the time, they amount to little more than pushing blocks, shooting eyes, grabbing silver rupees, or outrunning timers. I personally don't think that the dungeons really pick up in quality until the Water Temple, Spirit Temple, and the Shadow Temple to a lesser extent. If only because it contains several of those stupid silver rupee collection rooms. The Spirit Temple is the prime example of a good dungeon design in the game, since it takes a common item in Zelda, the shield, and adds a new property to it, which in this case is the mirror shield's ability to reflect light and energy beams, which plays rather well into the puzzles. With the boss fights, they are all pretty straightforward. Use dungeon item on boss to win, with the only challenge being the how, which is rarely difficult to figure out. The only bosses that come to mind that don't have laughably obvious battle strategies are Phantom Ganon, Bongo Bongo, and Ganondorf. With Phantom Ganon, there's the challenge of both figuring out what painting he will emerge from, and the second phase where you play tennis of death with him, though the Phantom Ganon fight is a bit of a letdown because of the camera, which will at times end up being blocked by the fence around the arena. Bongo Bongo is a personal favorite of mine, if only because of the passive use of the hover boots, allowing you to focus on finding the best method to take out Bongo Bongo. Shooting the hands with the bow is the obvious choice, though I appreciate how you can stun Bongo Bongo's main body with either a well-timed sword slash or an arrow. The final boss fight against Ganondorf is pretty much just a repeat of the tennis match of death, but with a better camera. And personally, I think it's much easier to judge depth in this fight over the Phantom Ganon fight. With Ganon's second form, much like the fight against Bongo Bongo, it allows for a few different approaches to the fight. Actually, the exact same approaches. Either you can stun him with a light arrow, or roll between his legs and hit his weak point to stun him. The fight's nothing special, but I have always just liked how intimidating he appears in the N64 version over the 3DS version. Must be the contrast. The only boss fight that really bothers me in this game is Volvagia. It's whack-a-mole. With the dragon. That's it. You got a dragon for a boss, and you decide to turn it into whack-a-mole. The other boss fights aren't bad, just formulaic, but goddamn. Volvagia. Why? Why'd they do this to you, man? The visuals of the game are bad. Just bad. I know, it's an N64 game. And I remember when it first came out, I thought it looked awesome, but it hasn't aged well outside of the boss designs and some of the enemies. Personally, I've always liked the atmosphere of the Forest Temple and Shadow Temple, which used to send chills down my spine when I was a kid, though I think that's more to do with the music than the visuals. Well, not much more to say about the visuals. Now for the soundtrack with the musical monocle.
Monocle here. Few franchises make it more difficult to analyze music without looking at it through nostalgia-tinted lenses than The Legend of Zelda. And some of the very first songs that come to mind when people think of Zelda come straight out of Ocarina of Time. Whenever Koji Kondo is on the scene, you know you're in for something special, and this game is no exception. With Zelda's well-loved and well-established tradition of epic mood-setting tracks, and the Nintendo 64's potential to bring franchises into a whole new dimension, Koji Kondo could have gone either way between employing tried-and-true nostalgic gold and taking the opportunity to experiment and give the franchise a new voice. Somehow, however, he did all of the above and more. Ocarina of Time built upon many of the franchise's most iconic themes, combined them with many new ideas, and transformed its voice into what was easily one of video gaming's most memorable track lists. This alone could have been enough to make the game stand out from others of its time. However, what I believe Ocarina of Time introduced to the franchise more than anything else is the use of characterization through music. Ocarina of Time offered a fairly diverse environment to explore with multiple cultures and unique characters. This was all really well driven by the supporting tracks of each unique location in the game. This kind of characterization has largely been used in the main series ever since. And that's about it. Back to you, Link on Air. Oh wait, the ocarina! Ocarina of Time not only used music to characterize the adventure and its environment, it also invited the player to participate in the game through the music in a way that was largely unheard of at the time, and I wish more games since could have experimented with this concept and expanded upon it. The player would learn and memorize specific songs that would change the environmental situations that surround Link, and acted as a core mechanic to time travel. To be honest, this system did have its flaws, namely taking too long and potentially taking the player out of the flow of the game. However, to give the player a unique tool by which they can wield the power to change the very circumstances that surround them through music, I can't deny that that is way cool. Plus, it brought awareness and a huge resurgence of popularity to what was then a largely unknown and forgotten musical instrument. Many people even bought ocarinas for themselves. Unfortunately, none of them seemed to work quite the same way as Link's. See, I have one right here. And just as I thought, no fire.
And with that, the game gets a 6 out of 10. The story is a fairly standard fantasy setup that gets the job done for keeping you somewhat interested throughout. They had the decency to come up with some original races like the Gorons and Zoras. I wish more fantasy games would do that. The gameplay overall is solid. Of course it is, it's been the foundation of every 3D Zelda game to come out since. However, the dungeons and bosses could have used more work. As I stated before, the dungeons don't gain any actual puzzles till around the Water Temple and onwards, with my favorite dungeon being the Spirit Temple. The visuals have aged poorly, but I can't really fault the game for that, so it didn't factor into the score. I would only recommend this game to people who want to get in touch with their gaming history. The later 3D Zeldas have since surpassed it. I'd recommend checking out Twilight Princess and Wind Waker over this. And from what I understand, Okami is a good game that is reminiscent of 3D Zeldas, though I haven't played it myself. Next time we'll be reviewing School Days. And before you run off, it will be followed by a 2D Metroid Marathon. If you enjoyed this review, make sure to like and subscribe, and have a good night.